Most people think faith is unshakable, that once a belief takes hold, it remains firm and unquestioned. But the truth is far more complicated. Doubt is a quiet, persistent force, a single question that can unravel centuries of unquestioned assumptions. It's the reason why every organized system of belief works so hard to shield itself from questioning, not because doubt is inherently dangerous, but because it exposes cracks no authority wants to face. Religious institutions, across history and around the world, have operated under a simple rule: maintain certainty. Certainty keeps people obedient, predictable, and within the boundaries of the doctrine. Questioning, on the other hand, introduces unpredictability. It creates a cognitive friction that challenges authority. When someone asks, "How do we know this is true?" or "Why should I follow this?" the answer can never rely on proof in the way science demands. It relies instead on tradition, emotion, or fear. Consider the subtle ways doubt is discouraged. From childhood, believers are often told that questioning faith is dangerous or disrespectful. Even small inquiries are framed as rebellious, sinful, or socially unacceptable. A child who asks why a story in a sacred text doesn't match reality may be corrected with a moral lesson instead of an honest discussion. Over time, this trains a form of self-censorship, an internalized fear of exploring inconsistencies, even when logic nudges the mind toward them. The power of doubt is not hypothetical. History is full of examples where questioning authority has reshaped entire societies. When people began to examine religious claims critically, it led to revolutions in thought, morality, and governance. Galileo, for example, didn't just challenge a belief about the cosmos, he challenged the authority that claimed access to absolute truth. The backlash was extreme: imprisonment, forced recantation, social ostracization, all because the act of questioning threatened the power structures built on unquestioned belief. Religion's response to doubt is also structural. Ritual, repetition, and communal reinforcement act as buffers against questioning. When people are immersed in a community where everyone shares the same beliefs, doubt becomes socially costly. Expressing skepticism can lead to isolation or shaming. Even when doubt arises internally, social reinforcement often suppresses it. People learn to accept contradictions silently, rationalizing inconsistencies to maintain group cohesion. And in doing so, doubt is neutralized before it can grow. But doubt is more than just social disruption. Psychologically, it's a mechanism of curiosity and survival. Humans evolved to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, and to seek evidence. Without it, critical thinking would stagnate, innovation would halt, and progress would falter. Doubt forces people to confront evidence, to distinguish between reality and narrative, to examine motives and consequences. It's uncomfortable, yes, but that discomfort is precisely why doubt is treated as dangerous by authorities seeking to control belief. The fear of doubt also reveals itself in how religious doctrines handle contradictions. Sacred texts are full of inconsistencies, historical inaccuracies, and moral dilemmas. Yet instead of engaging with these problems openly, institutions often employ deflection or reinterpretation. A story that raises a moral or historical question is turned into allegory, a metaphor, or a matter of divine mystery. This technique protects belief systems from scrutiny, but it also shows that doubt is recognized as a threat, something that must be contained rather than encouraged. Even modern religious communities are not immune. Look at how contemporary organizations respond to scientific discoveries or social change. Questions about evolution, climate change, gender, and sexuality are often met with selective interpretation of texts, appeals to authority, or outright dismissal of evidence. The pattern is consistent. Doubt, if left unchecked, has the power to destabilize the carefully curated worldview. Protecting belief requires managing the narrative, controlling exposure to contrary evidence, and guiding thought processes from an early age. This isn't just theoretical. Social experiments reveal the same effect. When individuals are given access to contradictory information in a controlled environment, those raised in strict belief systems often experience cognitive dissonance, a mental discomfort caused by holding conflicting ideas. The reaction isn't curiosity, but defensiveness. People cling more tightly to their beliefs when confronted with doubt, because admitting uncertainty threatens their identity and social standing. Doubt doesn't just challenge knowledge, it challenges who a person thinks they are. And yet doubt persists. It sneaks in through observation, through dialogue, through exposure to different cultures and ideas. It's patient, subtle, and remarkably difficult to erase. When people start questioning foundational beliefs, they often find themselves at a crossroads. Continuing along the path of unquestioned faith becomes harder. Thinking critically requires courage, because it means facing not just intellectual uncertainty, but also the social and emotional consequences of breaking away from long-held structures of authority. The threat of doubt isn't just philosophical, it's practical. Consider the ways doubt can ripple through a community. Once one person begins to question fundamental beliefs, It opens a window for others to do the same. Ideas that were once unquestionable become topics of conversation, debate, and eventually skepticism. Communities built on absolute certainty often respond with stronger enforcement. Rituals become stricter, teachings more dogmatic, and punishment for dissent more visible. The very structure of belief depends on a form of controlled ignorance, and doubt by its nature undermines that control. Religious leaders have long understood this. The strategy isn't always open confrontation, it's containment. Doubt is managed through layered responses, reassurance, appeals to authority, reinterpretation, and sometimes isolation. Consider heresy trials in Europe, where questioning central doctrines was met with public execution. The message was clear: doubt is not a private struggle, it's a public threat. And even today, subtler methods achieve the same effect. Social pressure, guilt, and fear of ostracization discourage even private inquiry. The system protects itself, quietly but effectively. Part of this is psychological. Humans are prone to what's called cognitive closure, the desire to have clear answers, to feel certain. Religion exploits this tendency, offering absolute explanations for the most complex questions: the origin of life, the purpose of suffering, the nature of morality. When doubt intrudes, it creates discomfort, and the instinct is to resolve it quickly. This is why believers often respond defensively to questions. It's not always malice, but an instinctual reaction to psychological unease. Doubt challenges more than knowledge. It challenges emotional equilibrium. The consequences of unchecked doubt can be profound. Look at historical examples of doctrinal collapse. When the foundations of belief are questioned, entire communities can shift in their worldview. The Protestant Reformation is a case in point. Martin Luther's challenge to the authority of the Church didn't just change religious practices, it triggered widespread social, political, and cultural upheaval. The same principle applies today, though more subtly. Ideas that encourage independent thinking erode hierarchical control. The fear of doubt isn't abstract, it's a recognition of the transformative power of inquiry. Modern research supports this. Studies in sociology and psychology show that critical thinking reduces conformity and increases skepticism toward authority. When people are taught to question assumptions, they are less likely to accept claims on faith alone. This explains why religious institutions often emphasize indoctrination from an early age. Early exposure creates a mental framework resistant to doubt later in life. By the time a person is capable of critical reasoning, much of their worldview has already been scaffolded to minimize questioning. Doubt also exposes contradictions that faith prefers to keep hidden. Sacred texts are full of inconsistencies and moral ambiguities. Rituals and teachings that once seemed coherent often conflict with modern understanding of ethics, science, and human rights. Doubt forces believers to confront these conflicts. Some resolve them through reinterpretation, others through compartmentalization. But the underlying tension remains. The act of questioning, no matter how polite or analytical, undermines the narrative authority of belief. This is why religion often discourages independent study. Access to information, historical texts, scientific research, philosophical critique poses a risk. Once doubt is sparked, it tends to spread, and once it spreads, it cannot be fully contained. The more transparent a system is, the more vulnerable it becomes to scrutiny. Control, therefore, depends on controlling not just behavior, but thought. Education in many religious communities is designed with this principle in mind. It teaches skills, yes, but always within boundaries that preserve belief. Doubt also thrives on observation. It is fueled by noticing patterns that contradict claimed truths. Observing injustice in the world, for example, often provokes questions about the morality of a supposedly omnibenevolent authority. Natural disasters, human cruelty, and systemic inequality all become points of inquiry. When these observations clash with teachings of divine order or perfect justice, doubt emerges naturally, and no amount of ritual, repetition, or social reinforcement can fully erase it once the mind begins to recognize the inconsistency. At a social level, doubt functions as a mechanism of accountability. Systems that encourage questioning are forced to adapt, evolve, and justify their claims. Systems that suppress it stagnate. This is why historically religious hierarchies have been cautious about encouraging curiosity. Unchecked doubt can threaten revenue, influence, and political power. It can undermine moral authority and challenge the legitimacy of institutions. In essence, doubt is power, the kind that cannot be bought or imposed, only nurtured in individuals willing to think critically. Even within devout communities, doubt exists in quiet forms. Private skepticism, unspoken questions, and silent disagreements are far more common than many assume. These internal challenges often remain hidden, suppressed by fear of social rejection or moral guilt. Yet they persist. Doubt does not disappear. It adapts. It waits for moments when curiosity outweighs conformity, when evidence or observation creates a cognitive opening, when a person begins to think beyond the narratives imposed upon them. Doubt is not just an intellectual exercise. It is a subtle form of liberation. Even when suppressed, it pushes people to examine what they've been taught, to weigh evidence, and to consider alternatives. It doesn't always lead to immediate rejection of beliefs, but it opens a space for reflection, for curiosity, for independent thought. And that is precisely what makes it dangerous from the perspective of any system built on unquestioned authority. Religions often attempt to preempt doubt by framing belief as a matter of identity rather than reasoning. Faith is tied to family, community, and personal morality. To question it is to question yourself, your place in the world, and your connections to others. This is a powerful deterrent. When belief is entwined with social belonging, doubt becomes not just an intellectual act, but an emotional and social risk. People learn to silence it, to redirect it, or to rationalize inconsistencies, even when their minds recognize them. The methods used to suppress doubt are diverse and sometimes ingenious. Consider the use of mystery and the sacred. By labeling certain knowledge as divine, unknowable, or beyond human comprehension, religious authorities create a zone where doubt is discouraged by definition. Questioning is reframed as hubris, curiosity as arrogance. The human mind is left with two choices: accept the authorities' framing or risk isolation and guilt. In effect, mystery becomes a protective shield against inquiry. Fear is another tool. Fear of punishment, damnation, or social condemnation is a classic mechanism. It is not subtle, but it is effective. When consequences are tied to questioning, even in small ways, the natural impulse to doubt is suppressed. This is why ritual and doctrine often emphasize obedience over understanding. People are taught to act correctly before they are encouraged to think critically. The sequence is deliberate. Action precedes reflection. Compliance precedes comprehension. Doubt also threatens internal consistency, which is central to any ideology. Belief systems often rely on interconnected doctrines, moral codes, historical claims, metaphysical explanations. Pulling at one thread can unravel the entire fabric. Questioning one tenet may expose contradictions in another. This domino effect explains why institutions treat doubt with such urgency, even when it seems minor or trivial. It is rarely the specific question that is dangerous. It is the act of questioning itself which can cascade into broader skepticism. Historical examples illustrate this clearly. When scholars, philosophers, or ordinary citizens began to apply reason to sacred texts, societies were forced to respond. The rise of secular humanism, rationalist thought, and scientific inquiry all emerged in part because people began to doubt claims that had long been presented as unquestionable truths. Each act of questioning forced institutions to adapt, reinterpret, or double down. Resistance to doubt is not a sign of strength. It is a sign of vulnerability. Doubt is also contagious. Exposure to new ideas, foreign cultures, or conflicting information can plant seeds of skepticism. One person's question can ripple through a community, creating dialogue, debate, and eventually change. This explains why isolation and control of information have been priorities in many religious systems. Limiting contact with alternative perspectives slows the spread of doubt. Education, media, and literature become battlegrounds, with authorities carefully curating which narratives are allowed to flourish. Yet doubt cannot be fully eradicated. It adapts, hides, and returns in unexpected ways. The human brain is wired to notice inconsistencies and seek explanations. Even when people outwardly conform, internal questions persist. Cognitive dissonance is a constant companion for those navigating contradictions between belief and reality. Over time, repeated exposure to evidence or inconsistencies can gradually tip the balance, prompting deeper inquiry. This is why intellectual freedom is so threatening to rigid belief systems. Interestingly, the very mechanisms used to suppress doubt can backfire. When people are forbidden to question, curiosity intensifies. Prohibitions can make ideas more appealing simply because they are restricted. This paradox explains why underground philosophical movements, forbidden texts, and hidden critiques have historically had such power. By trying to eliminate doubt, institutions sometimes elevate its value in the minds of individuals, turning curiosity into a quiet but persistent force for change. Doubt also intersects with morality. Ethical questions about justice, fairness, and suffering often trigger skepticism. When the world does not align with religious promises of goodness, divine plan, or moral order, people begin to ask hard questions. These inquiries are not merely theoretical, they reflect lived experience. Observing inequality, injustice, and suffering naturally prompts doubt about claimed absolutes. And once the mind recognizes a misalignment, it seeks answers outside prescribed frameworks, further challenging authority. The societal consequences of widespread doubt are profound. Communities that encourage questioning tend to be more adaptable, resilient, and innovative. Conversely, communities that suppress it often stagnate. This is why religions historically and presently monitor and manage the spread of inquiry. Doubt is not treated as a neutral force. It is a potential catalyst for social transformation, intellectual liberation, and moral re-evaluation. From the perspective of those invested in maintaining the status quo, doubt must be contained, redirected, or neutralized. Doubt is also a driver of personal growth. When individuals begin to question, they are forced to confront the foundations of their beliefs, to examine assumptions that were once invisible. This process is often uncomfortable, even frightening. People may feel disoriented, isolated, or uncertain, but these very feelings are signs of engagement, evidence that the mind is exercising critical faculties rather than relying on authority. Growth rarely happens in comfort. Doubt acts like a mental gym, strengthening reasoning, analysis, and discernment. Psychology offers insight into why doubt is so threatening to belief systems. Human cognition relies on consistency and pattern recognition. When a belief contradicts evidence or experience, cognitive dissonance arises, a psychological tension that demands resolution. Religion, in many cases, resolves this tension artificially. Rituals, reassurances, and reinterpretations smooth over contradictions, providing temporary relief. But when individuals start to confront inconsistencies systematically, the protective mechanisms of belief are less effective. Doubt begins to accumulate, quietly eroding certainty. One striking aspect is how doubt operates at both conscious and unconscious levels. People may outwardly follow rituals, recite prayers, or participate in ceremonies, while internally questioning the validity of those practices. This private skepticism is often invisible to authority, but it is powerful. It can influence behavior, choices, and worldview over time. Internal doubt does not need to be vocalized to be transformative. Even silent inquiry slowly shifts perception, shaping reasoning, moral judgment, and decision-making. History provides countless examples. The scientific revolution was driven not by rejection of spirituality alone, but by relentless questioning of authority, evidence, and method. Figures like Copernicus, Kepler, and Newton didn't merely offer new theories. They modeled the process of doubt as a tool for uncovering reality. Their willingness to question traditional explanations had profound ripple effects, eventually reshaping education, politics, and society itself. The lessons are clear. Doubt is not just an intellectual exercise, it is a catalyst for progress. Even in literature and philosophy, doubt is portrayed as transformative. Thinkers like Voltaire, Spinoza, and Hume challenged dogma through reasoned inquiry, forcing societies to reconsider morality, knowledge, and human purpose. These examples highlight a recurring pattern. Questioning, far from being dangerous in an abstract sense, threatens hierarchies that rely on unquestioned belief. Authority fears doubt not because it is inherently destructive, but because it reveals the contingent, mutable nature of claims once treated as absolute. Doubt also intersects with evidence-based thinking. When people develop the habit of questioning, they begin to evaluate claims against observable reality. Miracles, prophecies, and supernatural claims lose their persuasive power under scrutiny. Probability, statistics, and empirical observation become more reliable guides than tradition or authority. This shift is not trivial. It reshapes how people understand the world, their place within it, and their obligations to one another. Doubt encourages a framework that prioritizes reason over narrative and evidence over assertion. In everyday life, the impact of doubt is subtle but profound. People who question are less likely to accept claims at face value. They examine news, analyze arguments, and weigh evidence. They notice inconsistencies, recognize bias, and resist manipulation. This is precisely what makes doubt threatening to systems of belief. It empowers individuals, undermines unquestioned authority, and fosters intellectual independence. Doubt is not chaos, it is agency, the ability to think critically and act according to reason rather than inherited dogma. Education is one of the strongest antidotes to unquestioned belief. Exposure to philosophy, science, history, and literature provides tools for critical evaluation. It teaches people to examine evidence, identify logical fallacies, and assess moral claims independently. This is why historically access to education has been restricted in certain contexts. By limiting knowledge, authorities reduce the likelihood of doubt taking root. Conversely, expanding access to knowledge and critical thinking skills invariably increases skepticism and reduces the grip of unquestioned belief. Doubt also thrives in dialogue. Conversations that challenge assumptions, whether through debate, literature, or informal discussion, stimulate mental examination. Social reinforcement is no longer solely from conformity to belief, but from engagement with reasoned argument. Communities that encourage dialogue and inquiry tend to cultivate resilience and adaptability. Doubt, in these contexts, is a productive force. It is not disorder. It is a mechanism for refining understanding, evaluating evidence, and promoting intellectual maturity. The persistence of doubt highlights a universal human capacity, curiosity. No matter the environment, humans seem wired to question, probe, and investigate. Belief systems can delay, deflect, or suppress this impulse, but they cannot eliminate it. Curiosity drives exploration, discovery, and invention. It challenges narratives, tests assumptions, and seeks evidence. This intrinsic drive explains why doubt inevitably emerges, even in highly controlled or insular communities. It is not a flaw, it is a feature of the human mind. And yet, doubt requires courage. Asking difficult questions often brings social, emotional, or personal risk. Individuals must navigate fear of rejection, guilt, or uncertainty, but the rewards are substantial. Doubt leads to deeper understanding, better reasoning, and more informed decision-making. It transforms not just what we believe, but how we engage with the world. In this sense, doubt is both a tool and a responsibility, a mental discipline that shapes perception, action, and morality. The real power of doubt becomes visible when we look at individual cases. People who dared to question, often at great personal cost. Think of scientists, writers, and thinkers who faced intense opposition simply for asking questions. Giordano Bruno, burned at the stake for his cosmological ideas, is one example. His crime was not rebellion in the traditional sense, but curiosity that refused to conform. His execution sent a message. Questioning is dangerous because it undermines authority, yet doubt persists even under extreme pressure. Underground movements, secret debates, and private correspondence have historically allowed skepticism to flourish. When public inquiry was impossible, doubt found private channels. People exchanged ideas quietly, recorded observations, and challenged prevailing narratives in writing. Over time, these hidden networks of thought accumulated into broader movements, eventually reshaping societies. Authority feared what it could not see, because doubt does not require public expression to have power. It only needs a spark in the mind. The spread of doubt is also amplified by technology. The printing press, literacy, and now the internet have all played roles in democratizing knowledge. When information is accessible, claims can be evaluated against evidence, inconsistencies become visible, and critical discussion becomes possible. This is why controlling information has been a priority for authorities seeking to preserve unquestioned belief. Once doubt has access to evidence, its reach multiplies. It becomes a network, extending beyond individuals to communities and societies. Cultural exchange also fuels doubt. Exposure to different religions, philosophies, and ethical systems often prompts reflection on the assumptions we take for granted. Learning about another worldview can reveal alternative moral codes, histories, and explanations for human experience. The contrast triggers questions. Why do we believe what we believe? Are our convictions grounded in evidence or inherited authority? This cross-pollination of ideas is a natural incubator for doubt, and it's one of the reasons societies become more open and pluralistic over time. Psychology also shows that doubt is intertwined with morality. People who question are more likely to evaluate ethical claims critically rather than accepting them because they were told so. They analyze consequences, consider fairness, and assess evidence before forming judgments. Religious systems, which often assert moral authority based on divine command, perceive this as a threat. Independent moral reasoning challenges the monopoly of institutions over what is right and wrong. Doubt is not merely intellectual, it is ethical, shaping how people live and interact with others. Even in modern times, doubt operates quietly but persistently. People may attend rituals, participate in community events, or identify culturally with belief systems, yet internally question the claims and stories they are exposed to. Silent skepticism can lead to profound transformations, influencing personal values, choices, and worldview. What begins as a private question can eventually manifest as significant shifts in understanding, behavior, and even social action. Doubt is patient. It does not need immediate resolution to be effective. Case studies of deconversion illustrate this clearly. Individuals raised in highly controlled belief systems often describe a slow accumulation of questions, small inconsistencies noticed, doubts that quietly persist, and ultimately a series of realizations that reshape their worldview. These moments are rarely dramatic. They are subtle, gradual, and cumulative. What seems like minor questioning can lead to the unraveling of deeply held convictions. Institutions fear this precisely because it cannot be contained once it begins. Doubt spreads silently, organically, and unpredictably. Doubt is also intertwined with the development of critical thinking skills. Asking questions, seeking evidence, and evaluating claims fosters intellectual independence. People learn not to accept assertions at face value. They develop analytical tools that extend beyond religious belief to all areas of life. Decision-making, ethical evaluation, and problem-solving all benefit from this practice. The very act of questioning transforms the thinker, making them more resilient, adaptable, and capable of navigating complexity. History repeatedly demonstrates that societies which tolerate or encourage doubt tend to advance intellectually and socially. Scientific inquiry, philosophical debate, and political reform all thrive in environments where questioning is possible. Conversely, societies that suppress doubt stagnate, trapped by tradition, fear, and authority. The pattern is consistent across time and geography. Doubt, far from being a threat to stability, is actually a catalyst for growth and progress. The fear of doubt is not about the questions themselves, it is about the power that questioning unleashes. Doubt also interacts with evidence in subtle ways. People naturally notice when claims do not align with observable reality. Miracles, supernatural events, and moral promises are evaluated against lived experience. When there is a mismatch, doubt emerges. Religious systems often attempt to resolve this mismatch through reinterpretation, allegory, or appeals to faith. These are temporary solutions at best. The mind, once accustomed to evaluating evidence, does not forget inconsistencies. Doubt lingers, waiting for additional information, reflection, or discussion to deepen its effect. Doubt is not just an abstract concept. It is a force that shapes history, society, and individual lives. It challenges authority, exposes contradictions, and fosters critical thinking. Every major advancement in knowledge, morality, or social organization has depended at some point on someone daring to ask difficult questions. Doubt is the spark that lights the fire of inquiry, the seed that grows into understanding. Religious institutions have long recognized this. They know that once doubt takes root, it cannot be fully eliminated. It can be redirected, managed, or temporarily suppressed, but it always exists beneath the surface. That is why systems of belief emphasize obedience, ritual, and authority. They attempt to preempt the questions that might destabilize their worldview. Yet no matter how sophisticated the control, human curiosity persists. Doubt is resilient because it is a natural aspect of our cognition. Psychologically, this makes perfect sense. Humans are wired to observe, compare, and analyze. We notice patterns, inconsistencies, and anomalies. We seek explanations that make sense of our experience. Doubt emerges naturally from this process. It is uncomfortable, but it is also essential. Without it, we would accept stories, claims, and doctrines without evidence. We would remain passive, vulnerable to manipulation, and incapable of independent thought. Doubt is a protective mechanism, a tool for navigating reality. The personal consequences of doubt are profound. People who embrace questioning develop stronger reasoning skills, greater empathy, and a more nuanced understanding of morality. They evaluate evidence before forming beliefs, examine assumptions critically, and resist authority that cannot justify its claims. Doubt fosters intellectual independence. It also promotes moral responsibility, because when answers are not dictated, individuals must consider consequences and act with awareness. Questioning is not just thinking, it is a form of self-determination. At the societal level, the consequences are equally significant. Societies that tolerate doubt are more adaptable, innovative, and resilient. They allow debate, encourage scrutiny of claims, and foster critical education. Science, philosophy, and political reform thrive where questioning is possible. Conversely, societies that suppress doubt stagnate, trapped by dogma and tradition. History repeatedly shows that curiosity and inquiry lead to progress, while fear of questioning leads to rigidity and decline. Doubt is not a threat. It is a prerequisite for growth. Even in everyday life, doubt has quiet but transformative power. It shapes decisions, ethics, and relationships. It encourages people to evaluate information critically, notice inconsistencies, and make reasoned choices. A doubt creates a mindset that prioritizes evidence over authority, observation over assumption. It is the engine behind self-reflection, moral discernment, and intellectual freedom. Without it, humans remain passive recipients of narratives. With it, they become active participants in shaping their own understanding. Perhaps the most striking aspect of doubt is its persistence. It cannot be fully eradicated by ritual, authority, or social pressure. Even under intense indoctrination, it finds ways to emerge. Private skepticism, exposure to alternative ideas, and critical reflection ensure that questioning survives. Doubt is adaptive. It hides, grows quietly, and waits for conditions that allow it to flourish. The very strategies designed to suppress it, mystery, fear, control, sometimes amplify its appeal, creating curiosity that cannot be fully contained. Ultimately, doubt is not the enemy of belief, it is the engine of human progress. It drives science, ethics, philosophy, and personal growth. It challenges authority, reveals inconsistencies, and encourages independent thought. It is uncomfortable, disorienting, and sometimes frightening, but precisely because it is uncomfortable, it is valuable. The questions doubt provokes are the same questions that lead to understanding, innovation, and liberation. What every system of belief fears is not doubt itself, it is what doubt does. It frees minds from unquestioned authority. It empowers individuals to evaluate truth for themselves. It exposes contradictions and challenges claims to absolute certainty. Doubt creates thinkers, skeptics, and informed participants in the world, and that is why it has always been treated with caution, suspicion, and sometimes hostility. Yet despite attempts to suppress it, doubt survives, and in its survival lies the potential for growth, freedom, and reason. In the end, doubt is not a threat to humanity. It is its compass. It guides us toward questioning, toward evidence, toward understanding. It reminds us that knowledge is not inherited, it is discovered. It teaches that thinking critically is not only possible, but necessary. Every question asked, every inconsistency examined, every belief challenged brings us closer to truth. And in a world where authority too often claims certainty, doubt remains our most reliable guide. It is patient, it is subtle, it is transformative. Doubt is not something to fear, it is something to cultivate, to respect, and to follow wherever it leads. For in doubt, we find clarity. In questioning, we find freedom. And in the courage to think for ourselves, we find the power to live deliberately, rationally, and authentically.